Theo, it's amazing to have you on the podcast. You are you're probably the most passionate 16-year-old I know when it comes to energy, climate tech, batteries. I've known you for the past couple years, and you've been doing some really crazy things. And so I know that we're going to speak in a bit about sort of the project that you're working on now, how grants are sort of playing a role in all of that, the pretty big vision that you guys are chasing with that. But I think it would be cool to sort of turn back the clock. Maybe we go sort of like 2 years ago. Fill us in on sort of what were the core things that got you started on the path that you're on today.
Yeah, so first of all, like thank you so much, Ari, for having me on, as well as Julian. I'm really inspired by like a lot of the work that Merge is doing. It's actually awesome to get to talk to Ari again because we haven't talked in a while. But I guess just a little bit of background on me. I was really interested in music for a huge amount of my life. I think since I was 6 years old, I was playing violin and I was in orchestras and doing music and that was really a huge passion in my life. I went to an art school where we were doing theater and all these different things. I loved art and I thought like my calling was art for a long time. And around 14 years old, I started like making music and all that type of stuff, like rap music. It wasn't very good, but anyways, yeah. So I got really interested into that. And at one point, I just realized that I don't think music would be the best path for me. There were a lot of different reasons for that, but one of the reasons was I loved working with people, and I found that whenever I was working on projects with people at school or different things like that, within either in music or whatever, I really loved, I guess, the connection aspect of work. And I felt as though if my life was just playing violin 24 hours a day just to become the best ultra soloist ever, that would be not as fulfilling as something else. So I turned to a lot of different things. I tried out a lot of different things, and I eventually got to the Knowledge Society and got in. And I was super impressed by the work that a lot of other people I knew were doing. So, for example, my brother got into the Knowledge Society a year earlier and was really inspiring me to kind of go into tech. So I tried out tech and I thought, yeah, I probably won't like this. I want to go back to art. But a few months in, I realized that the thing I was missing was kind of that impact focus, that real the power that technology can have on other humans, right? And how to impact other people in that way. And so I got super interested in climate tech and because for a long time I was really worried about climate change, and so got super passionate about that. Got into batteries because I was super interested in Tesla and electric vehicles. Worked at a lithium ion battery lab where I was doing research on lithium ion batteries and electrochemistry. That eventually led me to like work in electric planes. So I was working on like aviation and electric aviation. And then I thought aviation's a little bit too slow for my liking. It takes like 5 years to build like a $20 billion project. So I was like, I don't know if this is the thing for me. And then I went into like venture capital, private equity for energy. I love doing that, but I also realized that it wasn't as technical as the thing I really wanted to do. And just recently, I went to Uganda to work on electricity plants. And that's where I think I found really my calling. Not, I guess I don't know what my calling is yet, but I found something that I think aligns with me a lot, which is real scalable personal impact using energy and climate tech that is kind of in the weeds and technical, not just like bird's eye view. So yeah.
So I'm just super curious. I know Ari knows you a little bit, so he probably has a little bit of the scoop here. But you're talking about the Knowledge Society, and then you were talking about all of these different things, just such a wide array of things. You're 16 now. How did you actually do this? Because I think that there are some people who might hear your story and say, that sounds really cool, but how do I actually pursue those things? Like, did you go and contact people? Is this all through the Knowledge Society? Maybe tell folks who are listening a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Knowledge Society teaches you a lot, but also kind of doesn't handhold you. It teaches you how to reach out to people, how to make connections with people, how to go deep into a certain space, but it doesn't it doesn't give you assignments, let's say, like you have to do this, right? So there's a lot of freedom, but there's also a lot of structure in that freedom. And what I realized is, like, how can I use TKS to further my ambitions, not just in like, just like, hey, look at me, I'm a cool 16-year-old, like actually make impact, right? So I wanted to use TKS in that way. And what TKS taught me was, okay, if you ever need something, what are the people you want to like, what are the people you want to connect with to help you get that thing? And how can you go deep into that so that you can impress those people with work? So, for example, how I got my first big opportunity, which scaled into a lot of different things, was that battery lab. And so how I did that was I went really, really deep into research papers and batteries. I wrote a ton of content and articles and videos. And then I sent that to like 200 different like people across my area who were working in like not even batteries, just like any type of research kind of that was more centered on chemistry and electrochemistry. Because my idea was like, okay, if I get at least one person, they might know this person in that different sector. And thankfully I got an email back from a professor at a battery lab in Montreal, maybe a month later, 2 months later. And he was like, hey, do you want to just come over and build a battery with us? And I used that opportunity to start an internship with them part-time during school. And that was really when I started kind of learning a lot about how to work in academia, how to work with people in an actual like legit way. And that spiraled into a lot of different things. So I'd say like your number one thing is always try to network and then also try to go deep into things and build content around it. And that's how I got started.
And I'm curious to hear what were your friends' reactions to this? Because there you're at public school, through this, you're in person, going from being super interested in the arts, theater, music, to now like building batteries in labs with people that you cold emailed. What was their reaction to all this? Do you feel like people saw this coming?
I don't know if they saw it coming per se. I think one thing that was great about being at my high school was that everyone was doing something interesting, or most people were doing something interesting. And so, though my story was a bit more unique because I was in tech, a lot of my friends were extremely good at music, like really, really good. Like one of my friends in music is now working. Well, he's at Vienna working with one of the top orchestras in the world. He's an amazing violinist, right? So I was an outlier in tech, but it wasn't as if I was crazy because there was also all these other people who were doing amazing things. And one thing that I really appreciate about that environment was it was really really humbling because sometimes you can get into your own head, right? And you can think, well, look, I'm doing all this stuff, but I never had that because I was surrounded by people who were also doing really, really amazing things, both in TKS and also in arts.
And do you think that there's like maybe a parallel there? Do you feel like sort of being in this environment where people were like striving to do really impressive things at a young age sort of made it more approachable? Do you feel like it set sort of a bar or standard of how like high you should be looking?
I think the culture in TKS was like that. I think in school it wasn't as much like that. I'd say there was a much lower bar in school, but I think that I was most of the bar that I was set by my brother, because my brother was always the overachiever, right? He was like always the great in sports, great in music, great in tech, So my brother always set like a really really high bar for me to follow. And so I owe a lot to my brother actually for my path, because I think older brothers kind of set the expectations and help you kind of get to that as well. So I think when it came to expectations, it was really my brother who helped with that.
How did you determine when to move on to another thing? Because it feels like you went through a bunch of different ideas. Some of it was in the arts, but then it got into sort of technology and science. How did you know when to move on, and how did you know when to stay?
Yeah, so great question. And I made so many mistakes. And so I think it would be good for the listeners to actually hear a lot of the mistakes so that they don't do what I did. So one thing I didn't mention was not only was I went from art to climate tech, but there was a huge part of last year that I wasn't even in climate tech at all. I was working on AI and sensors I think it was in the addiction and anxiety space. And then I was working with pharmacies on a pharmacy AI product with my co-founder until I left that and then went to Uganda. So there was a lot of different things that I did, and I do sometimes regret going from place to place because it can lead to you being less deep. So if I can give certain mistakes I made, I think the first big one was I had so much momentum and energy. My first year, I had so much momentum. I was in the battery labs. I was working with private equity on like $5 to $20 million investments. I was, working with aviation companies and wind turbine companies and working on wind turbine. Like there was a lot of great momentum in energy. And at one point, I was around a huge crowd of people who were working in AI because ChatGPT just came out and everyone was talking about AI. And got really worried because I was like, if I don't know how to code and I don't know how to do AI and all this stuff, then I'm just going to be replaced by the robots and I'm just going to be useless. And so at one point, I kind of just left. I left energy around, November of last year, even though I had so much momentum in this space and I was super deep and I knew a huge amount about batteries, a huge amount about energy storage, a huge amount of that space. But I decided to leave because I was motivated by fear to go into something else. And so I went into AI and I did well in AI. I worked on this AI pharmacy product for 4 months with co-founding this company for pharmacy. And we got a ton of traction. And now I think it's being beta tested with a bunch of different pharmacies across Canada. And we got like a huge amount of momentum there in pharmacy. But then going through that, I realized, well, I kind of missed the energy stuff. Though I went into this AI space and I feel successful in it, I don't think it really is like what I want to do because I really want to work on the future of energy. So why am I working on pharmacy tech? And that was also that created a huge amount of tension with my co-founder as well. And so we had to figure all of that out, and that was difficult, right? So I'd say like don't make decisions on based on fear to work on things. I think you have to do things based on love. And now that I'm back in energy and climate tech, I'm so much happier and I'm actually more successful in it than when I was working in AI. So yeah, that's a little bit of a understanding of that.
Now, I know that you're sort of being a bit critical of yourself here when it comes to, maybe not staying the course with energy, but I don't know, maybe there's something to be said about you only really realized just how much you liked it once you left and you kind of went away from it for a while. Then you realized, hey, like I have to return to that. So
Yeah.
maybe there was some benefit there.
I do think there was a huge amount of benefit in me leaving as well. I don't regret it. I'd say just don't do the decision based on fear. That was a mistake I made. But I will say that it has made me a lot more passionate about sticking in the long run against energy because I know what the other side is. So once you see the other side, and you've done the work in the other side, then you're more passionate coming back into what you want to do, right? And so I was really happy to be back, but I also don't regret exactly working in AI. I just think that for a few months I wasn't as passionate, so my progress stagnated. I didn't have as much momentum, right? That's completely fine. But let's say you're really young and you want to build a huge amount of momentum. I'd say stick with one thing if you really love it and don't go to another thing based out of fear.
Maybe speak a little bit more about this momentum thing. We have this expression where we say momentum is everything. And it seems like you have a lot of thoughts about momentum. You have some experiences where you've gained momentum. You have some experiences where you've kind of maybe lost the momentum by stepping away. Talk a little bit more about momentum and its importance to you.
I think momentum is fueled by like two or three things. I'm going to go with two things, but I can add a bonus third. So the first thing is technical skill. If you're really, really skilled at something, you will gain a huge amount you will compound a huge amount on that and gain a huge amount of momentum. So I have a lot of friends who were in coding for like a year or 2 years, didn't have like huge amount of opportunities and stuff like that. But one day they met the right person at the right time, and they were able to catapult themselves because they already had that valuable skill, right? The second thing, which I mentioned earlier, was actually people. So people are a huge catalyst, especially if you find the mentors that you want to be like in the future. So for example, I think maybe 90% of my biggest opportunities have come from like one person. Like 90% of my biggest accomplishments come from three people, right? That is huge amount of momentum when you meet the right person who wants to help you and who you are inspired by and who you want to be like and is on the same path as you, but just a lot further, like 20 years, 30 years ahead, because they can get you to where you want to go faster because they've been through all of the mistakes and all of the steps. So I guess an example of that is the CEO of Mangelus Energy, which is the internship I was doing in Uganda. Met him in Switzerland at a conference 2 years ago, and we became very close. We talked on LinkedIn. We had a ton of calls, and he made me go to Uganda, which was a huge opportunity. But not only that, he gave me access to a huge amount of his network, which helped me get a huge amount of other opportunities. And also, I'm coming back to his company in January to work on some new projects and to actually be an entrepreneur within the company to build kind of a separate entity within the company. And we're really excited about that. And so I would have never gotten the internship in Uganda, which was a transformative experience. But also, there's dividends like 2 years later after meeting this guy. So if you meet the right people, they can give you so much momentum and compound you further.
I'm curious to hear more about this company that you're building within a company. So, I mean, when you say that, you have the opportunity to maybe sort of be like an entrepreneur inside of this organization, like what does that actually mean, and why is that like important to you?
So I did an internship in Uganda where most of my work was working on carbon credits. And if you don't know what a carbon credit is, it's basically a document, a 40-page document that lets you access a huge amount of funding from different companies and entities to fund your project. And why carbon credits exist right now is because there's a lot of climate tech companies that are being built that aren't able to get funding for their project. And there's a huge amount of companies like Shell and Microsoft that have a huge amount of emissions, and they want to lower their emissions. So what they will do is they will invest into the company, and basically that company, through that carbon credit, gives them a carbon credit, which means that they've offset their emissions. So it's basically a company makes emissions. They want to lower those emissions, so they pay another company who's working on something climate tech related to offset their emissions. And that is done through a carbon credit, which is this 40-page document. So I was working in Uganda specifically on that and a few other things, but that was the one thing that I was working on the most. And we realized while building these carbon credits that not only could we access so much more funding to our company, but there were so many other companies around Africa and around the world who are building these climate tech projects that need the funding, but don't know how to get it and don't know how to build the carbon credit, right? So what we're thinking of doing is actually building a company within the company, which will be a carbon credit consulting firm, basically. We will go to all these different companies across Africa and then probably expand to the world and basically go them, be like, hey, you want more funding? We'll build your carbon credits for you. I'm trying to explain that in the most comprehensive way, but I hope that makes sense.
Super interesting. Yeah, I mean, as someone who's listening to this, myself, who has zero experience in the space, it's kind of, I'm hearing about this for the first time. It's a completely new concept to me. So, I mean, what's going on in Africa? You're from Canada, right? TKS is based out of Canada. Tons of people in TKS are spread across North America. What does the sort of like climate tech industry look like in Africa? What's going on in Uganda?
Yeah, so I love this topic and I could talk about it for like on end. So one thing I will say is for Uganda and for Africa in general, there's so little access to energy. And one thing I realized, well, I always knew this inherently about energy, and it's what attracted me to energy, the energy space, is that when you have more electricity and more energy, you can do more work. You create a more productive society, which then compounds on itself. So you have this idea of momentum, right? I think energy is the giant catalyst for all these different things. We want better AI. Well, we need data centers. How do we build these data centers? Well, we need more energy for those data centers, right? We want to create all these different products. Well, how do we build all these products? We need more energy for these products, right? And so one thing that you see in Africa is a huge amount of problems in Africa is that they don't have the catalyst yet, which is energy accessibility. And so in Uganda, the estimate is about 20% of the country has access to electricity and 80% doesn't. And just to put that in context, Uganda's population is 50 million people. So that means that means 10 million people do not have access to electricity and 40 million people do not. So as you can see, there's this huge gap. And what if you went from 10 million people to 50 million people having access to electricity and being able to use that to charge their phones, which will help them learn how to code or learn how to build a new business or learn how to invest or have access to clean drinking water so now they can go to school or have lights on so that they can study for school. There's all these different things that if you unlock the energy potential of Africa, you can make it one of the most productive places in the world. And that's why Uganda was so interesting, is because I was living in the capital of Kampala, which Kampala, the main city, has access to electricity. We had access to electricity, we had access to clean drinking water, and that was great. The productivity in Kampala is amazing. Like there's so many businesses being started in Kampala. It's amazing. You drive down the street and you see like 15 businesses selling you different things. But then I also, a part of the trip and a part of the internship was in the rural areas where we were actually building the electricity plants. And in those rural areas, because they didn't have as much access to electricity, there was way less productivity happening in that area. And one thing I was able to see was if you give people that access, now they can increase their productivity. And that's something that I'm just really excited to see across Africa and Uganda.
And so, I mean, I think this in and of itself is something I think we could talk about for a full podcast episode. But I know that you're also working on this other project with some other people that you met through TKS. Maybe tell us more about how you've benefited from grants, from fellowship programs, because I think a lot of people in TKS are more familiar with these kinds of programs that are like really, really excellent and more available to young people. But sort of starting back from TKS, before you got into these internships and these projects that you were working on, how have you benefited from sort of like non-dilutive capital and programs that are trying to just like help you out?
Yeah, totally. One thing that's really powerful about these grant programs, and a lot of them, is the community that surrounds them. And Merge is really good at doing this, but also I find 1517 and Emergent Ventures are also incredible at doing this. 1517 has this program called like 2E Camp, 2E 1517 Camp. It's in October, and it just happened, I think, a few weeks ago. Last year, I went there and I met all of these people around the world who had gotten all this non-dilutive capital, and they had gotten these grants. And not only the people who were working on stuff were really, really impressive, but also you get to be in, I was in the environment of SF for the first time because of 1517. And because I was with these amazing people, I could have these incredible conversations that led to a lot of great opportunities. So first thing about these grant programs, like the community is top notch. And then second thing, I've benefited so much from just a small amount of capital. So for example, when I was working on sensors and sensor tech, a huge problem in sensor tech is not being able to access sensors. And so being able to get like $1,000, $2,000 to, work with these Arduinos, work with these Raspberry Pis, work with all these different hardware components helped so much. So generally, like I'd say the capital and the community just helps so much. And I'm really excited to see, because there's a huge amount of new grant programs that are coming out every single year. And it's just really amazing to see.
Yeah. I actually think, you were talking about momentum building, how energy kind of, plays like such a large role in that, in the big picture of momentum building. It kind of sounds like non-dilutive capital plays a role in that as well, right? I mean, money just in general. But when it comes to this project that you're working on now, I'd love to hear what that actually is, like how you got into that, because the idea is pretty far out as well. I feel like in this podcast, you keep talking about things that people are just going to have to start really trying to work hard to wrap their minds around. But fill us in on sort of like what this project is. And maybe, after that, we can talk a little bit about, how these specific programs work and how you apply to them and all that.
Yeah, I'm kind of all over the place, aren't I? Because we're talking about pharmacy and all this stuff. But yeah, what I'm working on currently is this project called Sunda. And what it basically is there's a huge problem in the environment right now, which is noise pollution. And basically nobody's talking about it. Noise pollution in the oceans specifically. So a huge amount of marine life travels, and how they kind of maneuver through the ocean is through sound waves. Generally, a huge problem we're seeing is because of shipping and the industry like that, there's a huge amount of noise pollution in the oceans, which makes these sound waves kind of diluted, which makes it so that fish and specifically marine mammals like whales cannot find themselves in the ocean. So I think the stat is it kills 7,000 whales a year, which is insane. But not only that, it also hurts fertility rates, because when you can't find, let's say, like, I love to use the example, like the human example. Let's say you're at a party and the music's so loud that you can't really speak and mate with anyone, right? That's kind of what fish are going through. So it reduces fish fertility rates by like 40% for certain types of fish. We're also seeing a huge problem with it in the fishing industry. Catches for trawls, I think, have reduced by 65% or 70%, some crazy number like that. We're seeing all these problems in our ecosystem, but because noise pollution is kind of not really like, I don't know. I've never heard someone talk about noise pollution brought up in a conversation in the ocean. So it's not like a huge problem we're talking about, but it's creating all of these problems for marine life and generally for humans in general, because once you reduce biodiversity with noise pollution, the ocean is the largest carbon sink on planet Earth. It sequesters so much carbon. It sequesters 33% of all carbon emissions. So we talk about trees and planting trees. Nah, the ocean, bro. Like if we had two oceans, we'd solve climate change, right? The ocean is really, really important, and preserving biodiversity is really important to sequester carbon. So if we solve noise pollution, we can make it so that there's less problems with biodiversity and marine life, and the ocean can sequester more carbon, and that will help with solving climate change. It won't be a solution, but it will help. How we're thinking of doing that is there's selective noise cancellation, which is when a sound wave is going a specific place, you can cancel out that sound wave with another sound wave. So I have a team that I met a lot of the people at TKS and through these grant programs, where we're thinking of we're building this small prototype where we can analyze the sound waves using AI and then cancel it out using a specific sound. Now it's not completely proven yet. We have to like go through a bunch of simulations, work with a lot of different people, but if it works, we could stop a lot of whales from dying, which is good.
Okay, so that is fascinating, first of all. But second, how in the world did you stumble upon this problem? You just said for yourself, not many people talk about noise pollution in the ocean. Yeah, that's definitely true. Not many people talk about it. how in the world did you discover this is a thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, the data is always there. You just have to ask the right questions. One of my friends who actually worked in robotics, her name's Marta. She's amazing. She built this basically a while back. She built this robot that could plant more trees. Okay, so it could plant trees at a faster rate than humans can, and it's called Trovodor. It's amazing. It's trying to solve reforestation in certain areas, specifically in Portugal. So she's amazing at robotics. She's doing all this really crazy stuff. And during her internship, she was working for this company, I think it was called Kelp Blue. It was working on something similar, but not on noise pollution. It was working on another problem that people in the ocean are facing. And because she was in this specific company, in this specific space, she learned about this problem. And this is also the power of networks, right? She just reached out to me and she was like, hey, do you want to work on this? Right. And I hadn't talked to her for like a year at that point, right? So it's amazing. Certain people just come back into your life and really, really help you out. And especially because at that time I was getting out of Uganda and I was like, what am I going to work on next? You know? And so I decided, okay, let's look into this. And while looking into it, we found all of these specific facts that are crazy that you would never expect from noise pollution. And from there, we started building.
And so, I mean, I refuse to believe that, you're sort of like holed up in your room through all of this, not speaking with anyone, you live off the grid, right? That's definitely not what's happening here. So when you speak about, Marta reaching out to you after a year, I find it hard believing that this is completely unprompted. I think something that we learn a lot about, like at TKS, is maximizing surface area and really just maximizing opportunity for these chance encounters that end up playing huge roles in our stories. What are like some of the things that you might do yourself, maybe you recommend to others, to just sort of cast a wide net and keep yourself sort of floating around the kinds of communities that you want to be in?
This is an awesome question, and I love this question so much. So I'm going to try to answer this in the best way possible. I have a really great story about this, and it's probably my best story about this, about serendipity. And I can't believe this ever happened, but it's a great story to tell. So this was about a year ago, and I was working in battery tech, and I was working at a lab, and I was doing two internships during the summer. So I was working with this aviation company on hybrid electric planes, and I was working with the battery lab part-time. So I'm in my battery lab, I'm working on stuff, and I get a text message from a friend. His name's Clint, great dude. He was at that time he was traveling so much. He was traveling all around these different places. You'd see him on LinkedIn and he was in Singapore and then he'd be in Saudi Arabia, and he said, "Hey, I'm coming to Montreal for 2 weeks. Do you want to come talk?" So we planned a date. We started talking and he said, "Hey, I've been seeing your battery research. Can I come see your battery lab?" And I'm like, "Sure, let's do it." So I went to my battery lab and I put on my battery coat and I introduced Clint to a bunch of my PhD friends and the prof and whatever. And Clint was like, "Let's take a picture," right? And at this time, Clint had a huge following on LinkedIn. So we take a picture. Clint's really excited to like talk about this on LinkedIn. So he posts the next day a LinkedIn post with me and him like hugging each other, with me with my battery coat and my nerdy, lab goggles, right? And so that post is really authentic because Clint is really authentic guy, and it gets thousands of impressions. And I get a text maybe a week later from a VC, from a private equity firm. It's called Longbow Capital. And Longbow Capital is one of the biggest energy investment firms in the world. It manages about $2 billion of capital. And that's not insane, but for like Sequoia, it manages trillions, right? But for energy, that's huge. So I get a text from him and he's like, "Hey, would you be open to working with us over the next year on an internship?" And so that's one of those moments where it's like, how in the world is me just posting a picture and marketing myself with a few of my friends getting me to a place where I can work with, the top investors in the energy space? And that is a great story about it. And so I guess what you have to do is you have to constantly just keep yourself in the loop. You have to, maybe every month or 2 months, stay relevant, because people will just keep remembering you. And at one point they will text you with some random thing because they think about you, right? So I'd say keep yourself in that loop so that you get those types of opportunities.
It's so crazy. You really can never predict when an opportunity will come your way, but it usually is associated with something that you do that you put out there into the world. There was one person, just a remarkable person in the Merge community. He actually came on the podcast, and then eventually, after the podcast was published, somebody reached out to him, and he ended up getting a really significant grant to fund a lot of the work that he's doing. And apparently they came across the post that we made of the video, and that was sort of the thing that kind of got him on their radar. And it's just, the video wouldn't have been interesting though if it was just a random video of him kind of just talking, right? It was a video of him talking about all of the impressive things that he's already done, and showing some of the impressive things that he's done. So just putting stuff out there into the world just seems like such an incredibly beneficial thing, both to yourself, but also to helping other people understand that, you really can just do stuff. And you can also pursue your interests. You don't have to pursue the hot thing, right? So for instance, in your case, you went and you tried the AI thing because it was hot and it was popular, and you realized, gee, like my real passion and an area that I think I could have a huge amount of impact in is in energy. So I think there's just so much value in putting this stuff out there, because you never know what's going to come to you from it. But also there's so much value in other people hearing about it and learning from you, and learning from the things that you've succeeded with, and also the things where you might have made some stumbles along the way.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that idea of momentum that we were talking about earlier, which is, if you're constantly trying to put yourself out there and you're in the right spaces, either with Merge or with TKS or with all these different, with these people who really want you to grow, you can't go wrong with that. Like, I've never seen something bad happen because of that. So just always put yourself in these situations where things can really, really happen, and then keep yourself in those loops, and it will create these great opportunities. Side note, I watched the Tazeen podcast and I loved it so much. I thought it was amazing. And Tazeen is one of my close friends, and I thought he did amazing on that. Off the record.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're recording. This is on the record.
That's so funny. Well, I mean, we'll let you go in a minute here, but I think it would be really useful just to quickly talk about the grant stuff with this project that you're working on now with Marta and the team. You are very aware of what 1517 and Emergent Ventures do. Where can people sort of find them? Did you just Google grants? How did you come across these two programs? And are there maybe a couple key takeaways that you extracted from that application and interview process?
So one thing that's really funny about this is I actually used Merge for a few of the grant stuff, because I was looking for other grants, because I knew the 1517 and the Emergent Venture stuff, but I was looking for other grants that could help. And Merge actually helped a lot with that, because I was looking at other things like Remarkable and a lot of other grant programs that were on your website. And so that really helped. So just to actually really, really helped me there. And then second thing, for 1517 and Emergent Ventures, I knew 1517 maybe 2 years back because of the network I was in. So with the people at TKS, a lot of them were getting Medici grants. And I never thought I needed a Medici grant because I was kind of working in batteries and energy at the time. But, a year later, I was working in sensor and AI stuff. And I had gone to that 2E 1517 camp a while back where I was in that group. And so I could just text the founder and talk to him and be like, hey, I really need a grant for this, right? So with the 1517 people, it was very organic, where that relationship was built up over time. With the Emergent Ventures people, I searched up Emergent Ventures grant, and then there was the application for that. And then I got to talk to some really, really amazing people who run it, and got into their kind of group chat where I can talk to other really, really cool people in the emergent ventures community. So yeah, there's certain relationships for grants where you develop it organically, where you meet the people, and over time you build a relationship, and then when you need something, they're really there for you. Or, you just apply to these things and they really help as well.
Awesome. Well, I mean, Theo, this was a great conversation. I think that there are a lot of like really great takeaways in this for people starting, like not just in energy, but I think just starting period. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with Julian and I.
This was awesome, guys. It was so fun.
And a very quick plug here. Theo mentioned how he used Merge as a resource to find out about other grants. You can go and do that yourself if you're listening. It's just merge.club/guide. And we're adding new stuff there all the time. So we'll actually probably clip some stuff from this episode and include it as additional information about emergent ventures in 1517. So go check that out. And we'll also include all of the relevant links for all the projects and the things that Thea's working on in the show notes.